There are three branches of government in the U.S. legislative, executive, and judicial. The legislative branch is comprised of the United States Congress, the bicameral legislature responsible for writing and passing all federal laws, among various other functions. Back when the Founding Fathers drafted the Constitution, debate stirred over the type of legislature they'd have. One with equal representation, i.e. the same number of representatives for each state, or a proportional representation, in which the number of representatives reflected the size of each state's population. Unable to choose, they settled on both. A legislative branch with two houses, the House of Representatives and the Senate, which together form the Congress. This was all outlined in Article 1 of the Constitution, which also notes the functions, powers, and parameters of the Congress and its individual representatives. A congressman's primary responsibilities include representing the interests of their constituents, working together to write laws, overseeing other government agencies, and passing bills. But of course, that's all way easier said than done. To understand how it all works, we have to take a closer look at the makeup of the two distinct houses. The first and lower house is the House of Representatives, made up of 435 elected officials. Each state is allotted a number of congressmen, determined by their total population. To become a member of the House, one must be at least 25, have lived in the U.S. for 7 years, live in the state they will represent, and be elected by the people. Congressmen serve 2-year terms and are up for re-election every even year. The House is led by the Speaker of the House, who's elected by the House of Representatives. The House has a few exclusive powers not shared by the Senate. Only the House can initiate tax laws and spending bills. Only the House can initiate impeachment of the president or other government officials. And in the event that there's no majority in the Electoral College for one of the presidential candidates, it's the House who casts the deciding vote. The Senate, or the upper house, is made up of only 100 elected members, with 2 senators from each state. Here, a state like Wyoming has as strong a voice as California, even though California has a much larger population. To run for Senate, one must be at least 30 years old, have lived in the U.S. for 9 years, and live in the state that they will represent. Senators serve 6-year terms. Every even year, a third of the Senate is up for re-election. Before the 17th Amendment was ratified in 1912, senators were elected by the state legislatures. But now they're elected by us, the people. The Vice President of the United States serves as the head of the Senate, but he or she may only cast a vote in the event of a tie. The Senate exclusively has the power to approve presidential appointments and treaties. And when the House moves to impeach a government official, it's the Senate that tries them. Together, both houses have the power to tax, coin money, declare war, and regulate foreign and interstate commerce. But Congress's bread and butter is writing and passing bills. Getting a bill passed is no easy task. A bill can originate in either the House or the Senate, but before it gets voted upon, it goes through a series of committees and amendments and floor debates. After a vote, it moves to the other chamber and the process continues. If the one chamber makes any edits to a bill passed by the other, it has to go back for another vote. The House and Senate must vote to approve the exact same bill before it can move on. If it fails to get a majority vote, it has to be reintroduced. If it passes, it goes to the president's desk for approval. If the president chooses to veto a bill, which essentially voids it, Congress can push back with a veto override. But to do this, they need a 2/3 majority vote in both houses. Failing to pass legislation is an inevitable part of congressional routine. Congress is the only branch of government whose members are elected directly by the people, and the only part of government that tries to balance the relationship between the power of the nation and the individual states. To see how the Supreme Court checks the president, check out our video on the judicial branch. There are 3 branches of government in the U.S. legislative, executive, and judicial. The president heads the executive branch and has unique powers, including executive orders, vetoes, appointing federal judges, and appointing the heads of federal agencies, also known as the president's cabinet. He also acts as the commander-in-chief of the military. The cabinet, itself part of the executive branch, also acts as an advisory board to the president, with the chief executive of each agency, mostly known as the secretary of their department. But the president doesn't have absolute power to make these appointments. The Senate must vote to confirm the president's appointees, one example of the checks and balances at work. Cabinet members also make up part of the presidential line of succession in the event that the current president becomes incapacitated, resigns, dies, or is removed from office. First in line is the vice president, then the Speaker of the House, and then the Senate president pro tempore. After that, we start down the line of cabinet members. The president also appoints the heads of more than 50 independent federal commissions, as well as ambassadors and federal judges. Of course, those nominees need to be confirmed by the Senate as well. Check and balance. But the president also checks Congress. When Congress enacts bills, the president either signs the legislation into law or rejects it through a veto. The president also has the power to pardon and grant clemencies for federal crimes, except in cases of impeachment on both the state and federal level. In the global sphere, the president serves as the nation's representative. He can negotiate and sign treaties with another nation, but it only becomes ratified with the support of 2/3 of the Senate. The president also has the power to issue executive orders, which allows him to direct the actions of members of the executive branch without it having to be approved by Congress. But while Congress has no say when it comes to executive orders, the judicial branch, in the form of the Supreme Court, does have the power to overturn an executive order. But considering how much power the president is given, the eligibility requirements for the office of the presidency aren't very strict. The Constitution lists only 3 requirements. The president must be 35 years of age, a natural-born citizen, and must have lived in the United States for at least 14 years. Presidents are limited to 2 4-year terms, as stipulated by the 22nd Amendment, ratified in 1951. Before that, 2 terms was traditionally the limit until President Franklin Delano Roosevelt served 4. In the US, we elect a new president every 4 years through a system called the Electoral College. This means when we go to the polls to vote for president, we actually vote for electors who will cast their vote on our behalf. While all of these rules or stipulations may sometimes befuddle us, they reflect how important maintaining a balance of power was to our founding fathers. So while the president's power has expanded as the United States has grown as a force on the world stage, the judicial and legislative branches still keep the leader of the free world in check. There are 3 branches of government in the United States: legislative, executive, and judicial. The judicial branch is made up of the Supreme Court and other federal courts whose function is to rule on all matters related to the law and the Constitution. The Supreme Court has enormous power that has continued to grow since its inception in 1789. The first version of the court had only 6 justices. In 1869, that number grew to 9, and has remained that way ever since. Unlike the other branches of government, justices aren't elected. The president nominates Supreme Court members, as well as federal courts of appeals and district court judges. The Senate then has the responsibility to vote and confirm or reject the appointment. Justices don't have term limits. They're able to serve until they die, retire, or are removed by Congress through impeachment and conviction. The Constitution itself doesn't give any specific requirements for who can and cannot be a justice. In fact, federal law doesn't even require a federal judge to be an attorney, but traditionally, most of them have worked as lawyers. And when it comes to the power the Supreme Court wields, the Constitution is, again, pretty vague. Section 1 identifies the Supreme Court as a 3rd branch of government, and it empowers the court to decide cases. That's pretty much it. Section 2 touches on jurisdiction, and Section 3 spells out regulations around treason cases. There is no mention of interpreting the constitutionality of the laws, the very thing the Supreme Court is famous for today. So how did the Supreme Court get that power? The answer is an 1803 Supreme Court case known as Marbury versus Madison. The case is a little complicated, but basically, Chief Justice John Marshall ruled that the law Marbury was using to make his case was unconstitutional. Marshall's ruling established that it was the United States Supreme Court's responsibility to interpret the constitutionality of laws. And so the court's mandate of judicial review was born. And as the highest court in the country, decisions made by the Supreme Court are final. That is, unless a future Supreme Court finds that decision unconstitutional. One well-known example of this was the Supreme Court's ruling in the case of Brown versus Board of Education in 1954, which ruled racial segregation in public schools unconstitutional. This overruled the Supreme Court's 1896 decision in Plessy versus Ferguson, which had legally protected segregation as separate but equal. When the Supreme Court makes a ruling, all other courts must follow this precedent. Unlike the President or Congress, courts only act if someone brings forward a valid case. And unlike the legislative and executive branches, the judicial branch operates outside of elections and voter input. But it nonetheless has a profound effect on our daily lives by evaluating the constitutionality of laws to keep our government in check. To see how the legislative branch checks the president, check out our video on the legislative branch.